Hello everyone, my name is Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to talk to you about my 14 favorite books of 2024 today. These aren't really in any particular order besides like the bottom two slots. Everything else I kind of liked equally. Let's get straight into the top 14. Number 14 is Closer by Dennis Cooper. I could not have put this any higher on this list because this is one of the most deeply unenjoyable reading experiences I've had in my life. However, I have to appreciate that this book has a clear goal and it sets out to do exactly what it does. Everything in this book matters, everything is exactly where it needs to go. The escalation in this is absolutely incredible, both in terms of like you genuinely cannot believe the places that this book goes, but it is also genuinely really well crafted. I think a lot of the discourse around Dennis Cooper online kind of misses the point because a lot of discourse around him is like, why would he write this? And I think if you actually ever listen to Dennis Cooper talk, he will tell you exactly why he writes stories like this. Essentially, this is about a teenage boy, George Miles, and he is incredibly beautiful and incredibly attractive, and he is surrounded by men and boys who only care about his body and the violence that ensues. And it's basically about this desperate attempt at a true human connection that constantly fails. And no matter how hard they try, no matter the lengths that they go to, no matter what sexual practices they try, what they actually look for never happens. And that is so well done in this book. But by God, is it a miserable read. I felt like shit after finishing this, and I felt like shit while I was reading it. And this is a short book. It's 138 pages long. I read this over the course of weeks. And I read the vast majority of this on public transport, which is very brave on my part. But yeah, I still think about this all the time. I kind of want to make a video where I read the entire George Miles cycle and talk about each book. So yeah, that is Closer by Dennis Cooper. Next up is a book I do not have a physical copy of, and that is Reservoir Bitches by Dalia de la Cruz. I loved this just as much as everyone else did last year rather. This is a collection of interconnected short stories all following women in Mexico City. And the opening story and the closing story are by far the strongest parts of this collection. I cried during the last story. It was so incredibly moving and so beautifully written. That last story deals with femicide and kind of the emotional aftermath of femicide for the loved ones, and it's so sad. I really liked the story as a whole, but there were a few stories in the middle that really didn't do much for me. I felt like I was missing the cultural referent for them so much that it just didn't really work. It didn't really have an impact on me. But I want a physical copy of this. I want it on my shelf. I want to lend it to people because I think genuinely it's a great book. It is beautifully translated as well. I think the translators did incredible work on this collection. I'm really excited to read from this author again. So yeah, that is Reservoir Bitches by Dalia de la Cruz. The next book I want to talk about, I read pretty early into the year. I think it was in like April, and that is The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. I would have never ever guessed that this would be on my favorite books of the year list. Of course, I want to like every book that I pick up, but this was such an underdog for me. I originally purchased this all the way back in 2021, and then suddenly all the reviews of this started talking about how it's like weirdly religious, and that was so off-putting to me because people weren't selling this as like a religious horror novel, but like there's this undercurrent of religion and preachiness, and that was so off-putting to me that I did not read this for 3 years. And then I think it was Jen Atkin who read this and gave it 5 stars, and I was like, yeah, okay, fuck it, let's go. I loved this book, dude. This is what modern Stephen King thinks he does. This is a 600-page epic horror novel. The Book of Accidents basically follows a family of Nathan is the dad, Maddie is the mom, and Oliver is the son. Maddie and Nathan each have their own pasts that are beautifully explored in this book, but the book is kind of mostly about Oliver, and Oliver is this incredibly sensitive boy. He seems to have some sort of power connected to his empathy, and he just cannot help it. And the other kids pick on him a lot, and soon this new boy enters his life and becomes his only friend. But this boy is not what he seems, and he is in possession of something called the Book of Accidents. And this story goes to places you would never ever expect. This is so good, dude. This is an incredible novel. It's this long, epic horror novel about family, about legacy, and about generational trauma, and about loneliness and this desperate need to be understood, but it's also this cosmic sci-fi leaning narrative. It's incredible. I have Black River Orchard by this author, and this book has reference to Black River Orchard that I caught without having read that book. So I think that Jack Wendick is one of those horror authors where everything is like somewhat in the same universe, and I'm obsessed with that, and he has a book coming out in April that I'm so excited to read. So yeah, I loved this book and I highly recommend it. Next up is a book I think I also read kind of early in the year, maybe in May, and that's The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I have of course watched the Netflix miniseries when that came out, and I remember that the finale of that series made me cry so bad. It made me feel so upset. And I got the book, and many years later finally read this. This is incredible. This is the quintessential haunting house novel, in my opinion. This is about Hill House, which is haunted, and a group of characters that is invited to Hill House to live there and record their paranormal experiences. This is so good. This book has the best opening and closing, but the best opening paragraph of all time. I think about the opening paragraph of The Haunting of Hill House every day. I reread this so regularly. And in case you are somehow not familiar with it, the opening paragraph of Haunting of Hill House is, "No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and catarrhs are supposed, by some, to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, pricks met neatly, floors were firm and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone." Incredible. This is so fucking good. I think about this all the time. And what is so interesting, I think The Haunting of Hill House and House of Leaves have a thing in common that I honestly kind of should have expected but didn't. And the impact of those two books cannot be overstated. Once you have read The Haunting of Hill House, you will find references to it in every haunted house book that came after it. And the same thing for House of Leaves. It is incredible. And Berserk in the Fantasy Square. We're not talking about that right now. This is so good. The impact that this book has cannot be overstated. The genre would absolutely not be what it is without this book. And if you are one of those people who's really interested in the Gothic, and in Gothic spaces in particular, and the house as a Gothic space, the house as a haunted space, the sentient house even, this is an incredibly high recommendation on my end. I love this so much. The next book I currently don't have my copy of because I lent it to a friend. I just have the dust jacket, so that's Open Throat by Henry Hoke. Dude, I was so bamboozled. This book was sold to me as like this fun, humorous thing. I cried like a baby. I cried my eyes out reading this. This wasn't humorous or fun at all to me. It was just devastating. This is narrated by a mountain lion that lives in the Hollywood Hills and kind of watches the humans there and tries to understand their behavior. There is a homeless camp that this mountain lion is sometimes fed at, and one day this homeless camp is set on fire, and the narrator flees, and the story goes from there. This is devastating, dude. There is something about animal narrators that always really gets to me. But this book in particular is so sad. It is beautifully written. It has like these lines that are a complete gut punch. My favorite line from this book is, "I'm so good, but things don't get better." Horrible. It's so sad. But this was incredible. This was beautifully written. It had so many things to say, and it was pretty subtle with how it approached those things. So yeah, really, really great book. I gave it to my friend basically immediately because I was like, you need to read this. So yeah, great book. That's why it's on this list. Returning to the haunted house, we have Tarana Reef Deuce, The Reformatory. I talked about this in my haunted house reading vlog, which I will link in the cards, but this is absolutely incredible. This is another one of those long horror novels, but I wouldn't say this is an epic horror novel because it's set over a very short period of time. It's just long, and it needs to be long. I also immersion read this, and I read parts of it like exclusively on audio. The audiobook is also amazing. This is about Robbie and his sister Gloria, and they live in Jim Crow South in Florida in 1950. And Robbie gets into this very small altercation with a white boy and is sent to the reformatory, where he is confronted with horrors beyond his comprehension, both human and inhuman. And it also follows Gloria's attempts to get him out through the legal justice system. This is another book that is absolutely devastating. This made me cry on public transport. Even like in that haunting house reading vlog, in my final review for this book, you can absolutely tell that I cried. It is an incredible book. It is beautifully written. I cannot wait to read more from this author. You can really tell that this was such a close story for her, like in terms of her own family history. And yeah, I adored this. It is great. I know that it has gotten so much praise, but all of that is so deserved. This is a great, great book. We're just gonna stay with that haunted house reading vlog and talk about Model Home by River Solomon. This is possibly my favorite book of the year. I'm not making any promises because I did it exclusively on audio, and I would have to reread it physically to kind of cement that status, but absolutely incredible. This follows 3 siblings, but mostly Esri, who is the youngest, and they return to their family home because their sisters are worried about their parents. Esri moved to Great Britain as an adult, and when they get there, they find their parents dead and are confronted with their past and their childhood and growing up in this potentially haunted house. Another one that is absolutely devastating. I took myself out to dinner one evening and I listened to this audiobook, and I cried in a restaurant, which not my proudest work, but this book, oh god, this book is so fucking sad. And I think what makes this book so sad is not just what happens in it and the fact that it's grief horror and it's about grief. It has this underlying theme of trying really hard and still failing as a parent. And that got to me so bad. The ending of this is so sad. Like the way one specific storyline in this ends, it's devastating. This book also has a plot twist that I would typically absolutely hate, but River Solomon just pulled it off. Great book, beautifully written, really sad. I have seen kind of floating around that a lot of people thought this was too bleak, and honestly I can understand that. I don't agree, but there is very little hope to be had in this book. So I think you should know that before going in, but it's a great book, and I highly recommend it if you feel like you're in the right headspace for it. On the topic of books I read in videos and that I already have extensive reviews on in those videos, I have String Follow by Simon Jacobs. I read this in my lowest rated books on my TBR episode 1 horror video, and I love this. Am I the only person on this planet that loved this? Yeah, but this worked for me so well. I do think that what a lot of people are saying about this is pretentious, it's confusing, it thinks it's very clever in an off-putting way. I think all of those things are technically true, but I love this. Something about this worked so well for me, and I'm still thinking about it now. I think this is a great book. This is about a group of teenagers living in a small town, and strange things start happening, or maybe strange things are not happening at all. It's kind of one of those books. It's really, really quiet. I think in my original video, I talked about how this feels like an A24 movie. And since then, I have watched I Saw the TV Glow. And I genuinely think if you liked I Saw the TV Glow, I would recommend this book. And vice versa. So yeah, very, very niche, I think, in terms of audience, but it worked really well for me. I really liked the writing. I really liked the weird atmosphere. This is also not a short book. This is like 400 pages long, but the last 150 of those are so tense. I thought they were really tense. And I think this book really depends on if the reader believes the tension. I always talk about this. There are certain books that speak to very specific anxieties. And if you just don't understand why the characters are having those anxieties, if you don't understand the stakes, or if for you those wouldn't be stakes emotionally, the book isn't going to work. And String Follows is like that. The Guest by Emma Cline is absolutely like that. I thought that book was incredibly thrilling all the way through, but I understand when people are like, this was so boring. Why did I care about any of this? And I think String Follow was similar, so I loved it. 5 stars. Really worked for me. Next up, I have another book that I don't have a physical copy of, and it's also a haunted house book, but I haven't talked about it yet because I read it in December, I believe. And that is Rose House by Cardi Martin. This is incredible. This has a somewhat low Goodreads rating. I do not understand that at all. This is about Rose House. And it was built by this eclectic architect. And it's a house that also has an AI, but the AI has like its own personality, and a murder occurs in Rose House. And the 2 main characters go in to investigate, and things go from there. This is a novella. This is really short. It's a really quick read. But there is so much packed into that little novella. It has a lot of those sci-fi conversations around who is a person, who is human, and what makes us human and what makes us a person. It is beautifully written. It has a Haunting of Hill House reference that made me absolutely squeal when I caught it. And yeah, I'm thinking about it still. I think it's great. For some reason, I cannot get my hands on a physical copy of this. I know that there is a new one coming out in like March. I haven't been able to find a copy of this, only in French, and I can't read French like that. So yeah, but yeah, great. 5 stars, loved it. 5 more books to go, and as it turns out, these do actually make like a pretty nice top 5. So from now on, they are actually in a particular order. On the number 5 spot, we have Sundial by Catriona Ward. I think at the time that I read this, I gave this a 4 star, but this has stayed with me for so long, and I have thought about this so much, and I have recommended it to so many people that now I think it definitely deserves a spot on this list. This is about a woman named Rob, and she fears that her older daughter is a danger to her younger daughter. So she takes her older daughter into the desert to the ranch Sundial and tells her the story of her childhood. And it goes from there. This is good, dude. Catriona Ward is an amazing writer. I have also read Looking Glass Sound. I read that almost immediately after finishing Sundial. And her prose is so beautiful, and what she does so incredibly well is setting. Catriona Ward invokes settings so well. You can see everything that she's describing, you can smell it, you can feel the oppressive heat of the desert in this book. And yeah, it's incredible. It deals with generational trauma, and what this book deals with so well is how trauma can turn you into someone you don't recognize, and how trauma can turn people into someone else. It's about how children from the same family can deal with what they've survived completely differently. And it's also like a horror novel with like real horror elements. This is great, yeah. I will say the plot in this very largely hinges on animal experimentation, specifically experiments on dogs. So if that's something you absolutely cannot read, do not pick this up. Number 4 spot, we have a book that is incredibly fun, but also incredibly smart and has so many good, cool things to say. And that is The Trees by Percival Everett. This is a satirical novel set in Money, Mississippi, which, in case you didn't know, is the community in which Emmett Till was lynched in the 50s. And basically, in Money, Mississippi, they find a white man that has been brutally murdered, and also the body of a black man at the scene. But the body of the black man disappears and keeps reappearing at increasingly disturbing murder scenes. And it follows two black detectives that go into this community and try to figure out what is going on. This is so fucking funny. This book has like this very biting sense of humor. It is very unabashedly a satire, and it doesn't really care if it's like off-putting or abrasive, and I respect that so much. I love this book. I thought this was hilarious. There is one of the white characters in this is named Braden, which, I don't know, it's little things like that that just really, really tickle me. And at the same time, this reads like a thriller, because obviously it is a murder mystery, right? But also, this book has 106 chapters, and it's just over 330 pages. So when you're reading this, you keep going, oh, just one more chapter, and suddenly half of the book is gone. So this is so entertaining, but it also has all of these deeper themes about racialized violence and about the history of lynching in the United States and how this history was never properly dealt with. So yeah, this is incredible. I cannot wait to read more of Percival Everett in the future. I have Dr. No and Erasure on my Kindle, and I want to read Dr. No like right now. I'm so fucking excited for this. Incredible. Really liked it. The last three books, the top three, are all like unassuming and so short. Like, they're all these tiny, tiny books that all packed so much of a punch. And in the number 3 spot, we have The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin. This was my second book by the author. I also read The Left Hand of Darkness last year, and also really, really liked it. This is set on this jungle planet that humans from, like, okay, Earth doesn't exist anymore in this universe. This is part of the Hainish cycle. But there's this intergalactic empire, and there is a colony of humans on this planet that are, breaking down the trees because wood is one of the most important resources in this world. And they treat the natives, who are also descended from humans, but very different looking, horribly. And one day the natives decide to fight back. And the question at the center of this novel is really, what happens to a society once they learn what war is? Because the natives in this book are, they are a people of peace. They don't know war. They don't know violence at a large scale. They have interpersonal conflicts that sometimes can turn violent, but they did not know what war was before they were at war. And that is the question at the center of this book. What happens once a society learns what war is? And the answer to that question is pretty bleak. And I think in general, I think this is so short. This is 113 pages long. But what is really being undersold in the discourse around this book is how disturbing it is. This is so haunting, and it lingers, and it's a really, really upsetting read. Ursula K. Le Guin wrote this during the Vietnam War, and kind of in response to the Vietnam War, which I think gives this like another piece of this puzzle. It's another important piece of context. But yeah, this is an incredible work of philosophical science fiction. I cannot recommend this enough, but it's an incredibly heavy read. My second favorite book of the year, I want to say, was one of the first books I read in 2024. I think I read this in January, and that is Of Cattleman by Anna Paula Meyer. This is so short. This is under 100 pages long. Yeah, this is 96 pages long. It takes place in Brazil, in the outskirts of a major city, and it takes place in a slaughterhouse, and it mainly follows a man named Edgar Wilson, who really feels strongly about killing the cows as humanely as possible. But something happens, and the animals start to behave stranger and stranger. And at some point, the cows begin to commit mass suicide. This is an incredible little book. It packs, again, so many things in here. It's obviously about the meat industry, so this book relies on animal death and animal cruelty for its plot. I think that should be pretty clear from the synopsis. and from the title, because, you know, it says it right on the tin. And animals die in this constantly, all the time. And it is about, like, at its core, this is a novel about the price that people pay who kill living beings for a job, and what that does to you psychologically and how it impacts you. My favorite line from this book is, "No one leaves the slaughterhouse unscathed," and I think that's like really the thesis of this book, that killing things impacts people greatly. And yeah, this is an amazing little book. It is very, very thrilling. The back of this kind of compares it to Cormac McCarthy. I haven't read enough Cormac McCarthy to confirm this, but from what I've heard, I can kind of see like the similar vibe. This is a mean-spirited, bleak little book. But yeah, I loved it. I thought this was incredible. And my favorite book I read this year is another tiny, tiny little book. This is 128 pages long, I believe. And that is It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Andy Markin. This broke me so bad when I read it. I was crying basically from page 1, and I didn't stop until page 128. This is about a young woman who is a zombie. The world has ended and she's living in the post-apocalypse, basically. And she doesn't remember her life before she originally died. All she knows is that she used to love someone, and that she remembers that she used to have a life, but doesn't remember the specifics of it. And it's so heartbreaking. She doesn't remember her own name, she doesn't remember her lover's name, but everything about this book, everything in this book, everything she does and everything she thinks is about this lover. It's about this life that she used to have. And this entire book is a meditation on grief. It's the grief of losing your loved ones, the grief of losing your life, the grief of losing the world as you knew it. And it is so beautifully written. It is so, so sad. There is some sort of undercurrent of hope in there, and of moving on, and of rediscovering yourself after loss. But this is so, so sad. And it really, really stayed with me. It is beautifully written. It has so many beautiful quotes. And I cannot recommend this highly enough. This is an incredible little book. And it made me very sad. So that's it. Those are all my favorite books of 2024. As of the filming of this, I have not yet decided if I'm posting or making a worst of the year video, because in all of 2024, I only had 4 1-stars. And I always say that if we're using a rating scale out of 5, an average book isn't a 3, it's a 2.5. So putting a 2 on the worst off list feels really disingenuous and weird, so I just don't know if I have enough books to make a video like that. Maybe I will combine worst books and most disappointing books, because I definitely had some disappointments last year. But yeah, you will find out if I ever make that video. Please let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books or what your favorite books of the year were, and I will talk to you soon. Bye bye!